Large-scale organisations operate in an open environment. Well, this means that the organisation is affected by what is occurring outside the immediate organisation, the wider business environment, and its actions in turn affect the outside world. This business environment consists of the internal environment and the external environment. Well, the internal environment consists of all the factors and pressures and influences within the organisation and over which it has direct control or is able to affect directly. Whereas the external environment consists of the factors, and pressures and influences that are outside the organisation, and the LSO has little or no control over these factors, but is directly affected by them. Well, the external environment consists of the macro and the operating environment, whereby the macro environment consists of those broad trends and conditions, such as the economy, over which the business has no control. The operating environment, on the other hand, consists of those stakeholders which the organisation interacts with in a day-to-day business. And we'll have a look at each of these in turn. Well, before we look at that, let's have a look at what a stakeholder is. And a stakeholder is an institution or organisation which has a vested interest in the success of the organisation or is directly affected by its actions. Well, why is this environment so important to business management? Well, managers need to understand these forces or these pressures which have most impact on the organisation, and they must respond accordingly by developing strategies to counter any negative forces and to take advantage of the opportunities that the environment presents. In doing so, the organisation will maintain its competitive edge and ensure its long-term survival. Conversely, if managers don't identify these pressures and respond accordingly, then they may lose that competitive edge and long-term survival is not assured. Well, let's have a look at the external environment. I've already said that the external environment consists of the macro and the operating environment. Well, let's have a closer look at this macro environment. And it consists of 4 or 5 major pressures. And the best way to remember that is through the use of PULSE. PULSE consisting of political, economic, legal, technological and social influences. So managers must identify these trends and respond accordingly. Let's have a look at each one individually. Political pressures. Well, these are government actions. This is the pressures or the influences that large-scale organisations must be aware of in terms of government action and must respond to accordingly. They must develop new policies within their organisations. They must change their practices or processes, or they must comply with any government legislation as a result. For example, the carbon emissions initiative by the Gillard government, or the introduction of OH&S and of the goods and services tax earlier in this decade. Secondly, Economic influences, a significant impact and very topical at the moment. Economic influences refers to those fluctuations in the level of economic activity. Economic activity being that level of spending and production within the economy. In terms of recession, in times of recession rather, then organisations' sales would be reduced, there's less spending in the economy, therefore their profits have been reduced, and organisations must act accordingly, develop strategies to reduce their costs. Other economic influences could be the value of the Australian dollar, or the level of interest rates. If the Australian dollar is high, that will have a direct impact on Australian industries, and they must respond accordingly. Legal pressures, such as which consist of the laws or the legislation and the rules that regulate business activity, such as the industrial relations laws, or OH&S laws, or occupational health and safety laws, or anti-discrimination legislation, or consumer legislation, environmental legislation. Organisations and LSOs must respond accordingly and comply with all legislation. Therefore, they may need to respond by developing strategies, changing their work practices and procedures, training their staff, perhaps recruiting new staff who have the knowledge of the new legislation. Perhaps they need to change their culture to incorporate any legislative changes. If they don't respond, then they could face legal consequences. Technological advances refers to innovation or invention, new and better ways of producing products, the use of robotics, the use of new communication, such as the e-commerce option. Organisations must respond to these and adapt these in their practices. They must train their staff in terms of technology. For example, organisations such as Bunnings or Coles and the like, who have introduced new self-checkouts, or the sophisticated robotics used in the manufacturing industries, which in turn lower their costs of production. And then, of course, there's the social trends, what's right or what's perceived to be right and wrong within the society has a huge impact on what organisations do. The environmental issues, so ensuring that they have a social justice or social responsibility programs in place. Again, this would require perhaps a new change to their practices and procedures. It may involve a change in their culture. It may involve a change in their policy, etc. Let's have a look at the part of the external environment. Well, we've looked at the macro environment. Let's have a look at the operating environment. And we've already talked about those stakeholders, and we'll have a look at a few of those. Firstly, customers. Well, customers being those people who purchase the product, whether it be a good or service, and who have a need to be satisfied. They can directly influence what organisations do. They're after the best price, quality and customer service. If organisations don't respond to the needs of their customers, then they will lose that competitive edge and not survive. So they must respond to what customers need. Suppliers. Suppliers are those organisations who provide the raw materials or the resources, including the raw materials, the capital that organisations use to operate. They can directly affect how an organisation operates, and they must respond accordingly. Large-scale organisations must have a range of suppliers in which they purchase their goods from or their resources from, and again, they must provide them with quality product, quality materials, because that will all have an impact on their bottom line. If they have poor relationship with their suppliers, that again will be reflected in a loss of competitive edge. Creditors, along with their suppliers, mainly banks, who are those organisations that lend them the finance for their organisation. Competitors, of course, the stakeholders, they also have an interest in the success, or should I say failure, of these organisations. Well, competitors are the rivals who sell similar or the same product and are competing for the same market. Well, organisations or LSOs must respond to what their competitors do. If competitors lower their prices, then the LSO must meet that. If they improve their product or innovate, then they must respond accordingly and develop strategies to ensure that they maintain that competitive edge, or they will not survive. Lobby groups. Let's have a quick look at the lobby groups. Well, lobby groups are those, or alternatively called pressure groups or special interest groups, who actively campaign to have LSOs adopt their view into their policies. For example, the environmental groups or trade unions or consumer groups who place pressure on these organisations to incorporate their views into their policies. For example, the environmental groups place pressure to reduce carbon emissions and to become environmentally friendly. Most organisations have responded by eradicating the use of plastic bags or using more recycling initiatives within their organisation. Again, it will require training of staff, perhaps recruitment of new staff, and perhaps adopting or adapting the policy to reflect environmentally friendly procedures. Well, let's have a look at the internal environment. Well, as we said earlier, the internal environment consists of those factors or pressures within the organisation themselves, and that an organisation has direct control over. Once again, it can remember that change can be initiated, and organisations can be influenced by their employees, the people who work for them, their policy and procedure, which are the broad guidelines that an organisation has on a particular area, whether it be environmental issues, whether it be ethics and social responsibility, whether it be marketing. Organisations can adapt their policy to meet the needs of a changing environment. The management structure is something that they can control directly, the way the organisation is formally arranged to achieve its objectives. Corporate culture, which are the shared beliefs and expected patterns of behaviours within the organisation. Organisations, that is, can directly affect the corporate culture, what values they perceive to be core values within the organisation, and these can usually be found in an organisation's mission or vision or their policy documentation. They can directly affect that culture. And the culture has a direct impact on the way the organisation is run, hence its competitive edge. And of course, there's the management themselves, the management styles that are used, the way that managers interact with their employees and or with their customers. The style is something that organisations can directly affect, and once again will have an impact on the levels of productivity, levels of morale, customer satisfaction, and so on. Well, as you can see, organisations do operate within that macro and operating environment, and that the management of these forces or these pressures is a major activity of all management in attempting to influence and control those forces that affect the performance of the organisation and ensure their competitive edge.